Okay, we are on the air. Hey, Swag
Hey, how are you
and
guys doing?
Nicole.
Welcome to our show.
Happy to be your first victim.
So, Chris Joseph and I are really excited to be talking to you today. Chris and I have, for the last few years, threatened and joked about starting our own. Well, the people have demanded it, really, that we take it to the air and start our own show. So, welcome to the pilot. We'll see what happens. So I'll hand it over to Chris to introduce himself.
Well, I just wanted to add to that. We would never have done this on our own, but because of the huge demand that,
Never. We're humble people. We have
yeah.
many things going on in our lives. We would never have done this unless the people demanded it. So thank you to the people.
So Swag, you're our first victim. We don't need to introduce ourselves. We'll introduce Swag. And actually, Swag, you can talk about yourself. Let's just jump right in. How did you get the nickname Swag? When did you get it? Were people calling you that, or did you call yourself that?
So back, all the way back in my high school days, there were way too many Marks in the class for people to tell us apart. So people started calling me Zweig, which was an abbreviation of my last name. And I kept that nickname through high school and college. And then after college, I moved down to Texas, and the Zweig, the ZW was a complicated syllable for the Texas tongue, and it kind of morphed into Swag. And stuck around ever since.
Well, and I don't know if people know this, but your full name is Mark
Rosenzweig.
Yeah. So once you hear that, it's pretty. There's no funny backstory with being swaggy or anything like that, is there?
Just a coincidence.
Yeah, just a coincidence, right? So of course our show is about Jazz Fest because that's what we all like, and that's what brings us all together. So we've been really interested because I think we're all excited for October. Hopefully October happens, and thinking about how much we miss Jazz Fest and we miss all the things that happen around it. So that's really why we're putting this little interview program together. So the first things first, Mark Swag, whatever you want to be called, right? When was your first Jazz Fest? Because I think of you as you're one of my you're like an icon of going to Jazz Fest in my mind. So when did it start?
It started for me in 1996. Had a couple of friends from work. He said, "Hey, we're thinking about going down to New Orleans for Jazz Fest. Do you want to go?" And I had no idea what Jazz Fest was. I was imagining sitting back on a lawn with a glass of Chardonnay, something like Tanglewood must be. I had no idea. Of course, this is before there was a whole lot of much of anything on the internet. And a few weeks later, I saw a partial listing of who the headliners were going to be, and I saw that one of them was the Allman Brothers. And I thought, wow, okay, this is not my grandparents' jazz festival.
Mm-hmm. And so, what was the whole experience like when you got there?
It was crazy. So I went first weekend. First Friday of 1996 is somewhat infamous in Jazz Fest annals because that was the day that Phish played. And so the Phish fans had descended upon the fairgrounds. And I remember walking around food area 1, and there were just crawfish shells all over the ground. And these, hippies in their tie-dye shirts walking all over the place. But I just walked around and followed my ears and kind of rediscovered my love of live music. I saw country rocker Jesse Dayton, and the next stage over, there was R&B legend Gene Knight. I saw the Allmans, who I was a huge fan of, and remember closing out with Lionel Hampton playing in the jazz tent. I was thinking, okay, well, maybe there's a little bit my parents' Jazz Fest. So it's just a huge variety of music, and my main takeaway from that year was I need to come back.
Is it safe to say you did not go see Phish?
I caught a little bit of the set. I was curious, but I was wandering. I spent a lot of time wandering in my first year because there were so many bands that were new to me. I just kind of followed my ears.
So that was 1996. I remember that Jazz Fest. I remember being outside in line with some of the fish heads who had absolutely no idea there were other bands playing at Jazz Fest. They were sort of pleasantly surprised, I think. Have you been to every Jazz Fest since, as long as they've been held?
Since then, yes. So it's been 24 years of Jazz Fest. I started off just going one weekend, and then I kind of stretched it out and included some of the midweek days. And by 2004, I was going for the full of both weekends. And I think I've missed one day of Jazz Fest since. So if I had to count it up, I think somewhere between 130 and 135 days.
Well, now you have to tell us, why did you miss that one day of Jazz Fest?
So there was this alternate festival that went on for a couple of years called Fire Fest. Not to be confused with the Fire Fest that was infamous down in the Caribbean the other year. But this was just a who's who of all of the funk bands that were coming in town anyway for Jazz Fest, all playing in one day over at Mardi Gras World. And they did it on, I think it was Friday of second weekend. And I was curious about that. So that's the only time I've ever been in New Orleans and skipped a day at the Fairgrounds.
So all of those years, I know this is impossible, perhaps Herculean. Narrow it down, 2 or 3 standout performances. What made them remarkable?
Sure. I mean, well, there's of course, the classic bands that I grew up loving. Guys like Billy Joel and the Almonds, and Jimmy Buffett and the Who, and then there were the bucket list bands. Robert Plant and Etta James and Stevie Wonder, who I'd never seen before. And then there were some sets that were just made remarkable by the experience. So, the Pouring Down Rain for the Midnight Disturbers or Neil Young, and stuff like that. But if I had to pick out 2 or 3, so the first one I can think of was back in 2005, and it was in the Blues Tent, but it was a tribute to Sister Rosetta Tharpe. And this was Marcia Ball and Maria Muldaur and some of their friends. But Irma Thomas came up and sang a song. And she sang Themes of Heaven. And I wasn't in the tent. It was too crowded. I was kind of in the crust on the outside of the tent looking in, but I couldn't see real well, but I could hear. And it was probably the single most remarkable vocal performance I've ever heard. I don't know if I don't think she's ever recorded that song. I'm not sure she's ever performed it again since. And maybe that's for the best, because you can't live up to that kind of perfection. But this was before Irma was doing gospel at Jazz Fest. And I think because of this performance, they started that. So then the very next year, suddenly there was Irma in the gospel tent doing her tribute to Mahalia Jackson. And that went on for a number of years. And now I think it's morphed into the gospel soul of Irma Thomas. But before then, she didn't sing gospel in public very often. She did her regular festival set of her R&B and soul hits. But yeah, that one was remarkable. Second one I thought of was Rhiannon Giddens back in 2017. She used to be part of the Carolina Chocolate Drops before she went out and started her solo career. And she was touring behind an album called Freedom Highway, which was all about both the civil rights movement, but also songs going back to the times of slavery. And it was just when she's a remarkable singer. But the stories that these songs tell were so personal, and part of the reason that one gets elevated is they recorded it. And they record a lot of bands at Jazz Fest and sell them, but this was one of the really good ones that remarkably was available on CD afterwards. And the last one I got to throw out there was at the last Jazz Fest 2019. Spencer Boren, who was at the time, dying of cancer, and we all knew this was going to be, probably almost certainly his final Jazz Fest. And he opened up the Gentilly stage, and I sat there and I watched his set, and my heart was full. And I made it through that, and then the following set after his on the same stage was Paul Sanchez with the Rolling Road Show. And he brought up Alex and he brought up Spencer and the Wright brothers group that they put together. And they did this song called, the refrain goes, let's raise our glasses and drink to the sadness and sing the familiar old songs with our friends. All too soon comes the end of the tune. Who knows when we'll be together again. And I'm not someone who cries at musical performances. I've never cried at Jazz Fest before, but yeah, that one made me cry.
Yeah. I think I was up on the rail with Chris and Susie for part of Spencer Barn, and I think that the energy and emotion of all of that was, I mean, if you had no idea who anybody was on that stage and you walked up and you stood in that crowd, you would know that something special was taking place.
Sure.
Absolutely. Well said.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing those. So when you go to Jazz Fest, what is your go-to when you get inside the fairgrounds? Do you have a pattern, routine?
So I have a few different patterns, and it just depends on the day. But I walk in the gates, and the first thing you hear is the gospel tent. I always come in through that gate, and if the gospel tent's going, I take a sharp right turn and head in there and catch a few songs of gospel. So that's the spiritual start for Jazz Fest. But sometimes I'll walk in the fairgrounds and the gospel tent's quiet. It's between sets, and then the sentimental thing for me is to walk across the track and over to the beer booth at the Threadheads volunteer and get some hugs from my friends there. And then the practical thing I do is I head over to the grandstand. I always bring a Camelback full of ice. And I go to the grandstand where the drinking fountains are and fill it up with water because you got to stay hydrated. That's the start of my Jazz Fest day.
So speaking of your friends, let's talk about the Threadheads a little bit. So how did you learn about them, and what's been your involvement with them?
Right. So the Threadheads are a group that I'd say they're the denizens of the Jazz Fest chat board on the Jazz Fest website. And so I was there from the beginning when they kind of first opened up that forum. And I've been there through various technologies and all sorts of changes. I am a moderator of the Jazz Fest board. There used to be another moderator, but he was kind of a slacker.
Yeah.
They needed some extra help, and somehow I got volunteered one day. The Threadheads as an organization, some of the good fundraising and charity work they do. I'm not a member of the board, but I'll do what I can with my website and my blog to help publicize and spread the word about the events they're doing. But mostly when I think about Threadheads, I think it's just a great group of friends of mine.
So one of the things you're known for is the website you started many years ago called Swagland, which I think not only talks about New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival, but also the Austin City Limits Festival, I think, right?
I haven't really touched that part of the website in probably well over a decade. I stopped going to that festival. It's pretty much just Jazz Fest at this point.
So when did you start for Jazz Fest? Did you create that site early on?
Yeah, so my first two Jazz Fests, I had a great time, but it was a bit of a bumpy experience. My first Jazz Fest, I think on the very first day we parked our car in probably someplace where we shouldn't have, and it got broken into. And the next year, I remember we parked our car someplace where we shouldn't have, and it wasn't legal, and it got towed. we were paying over $200 a night, and this is back in the 90s for terrible hotels. And I said, okay, I'm making some mistakes here, but I don't know all the answers. Maybe other people can learn from my mistakes. And professionally, I was doing some work that I wasn't a website builder, but it was the work I was doing was peripheral to that. And I thought, I should learn, what does it take to build a web page? So I put it together. The very first version was called Swag's Jazz Fest FAQ. It was hosted just on the free page that my ISP gave me as a subscriber. And it was probably a dozen or two questions, and I put the whole page together using a tool called Notepad. It's just kind of grown since then.
Nice. For anyone who's watching this video, it's a great, great website. And I think it's really the premier how-to experience Jazz Fest. It's really, really great. And thank you for putting that together.
Thank you. That's swagland.com.
Swagland.com. So Nicole and I would never have thought of a question like this, but I can't remember who on the Threadhead Facebook page pitched this question, but it is as follows. Have you had any interesting or unusual encounters because of Swagland?
I've had people on the bus on the way to Jazz Fest say, "Hey, aren't you Swag?" I've had cab rides to the fairgrounds where they fill the cab up and just one or two people, and someone will get in the cab and turn around, "Hey, aren't you Swag?" But the best one was a buddy of mine from New York who came to Jazz Fest. He was one of my old Jazz Fest running buddies, and one year he talked his cousins into coming. And so he told his cousins, "Hey, you gotta check out the site that my friend does." And his friend said, "Wait, you're friends with Swag? You mean there really is a Swag?" Got a kick out of that.
I actually think that's how I met you the first time. We were there was one of those little like street parties by the Maple Leaf, and it was the year that there was no Jazz Fest. And I brought my partner Chris to, I think it was probably his first, maybe it was his second Jazz Fest. It doesn't matter. Anyhow, we were walking around and I spotted you, but I hadn't met you in person yet for whatever reason. And I said, "There's Swag. I have to go say hi to him." And I chased you down and you were probably like, "Who's this crazy woman?" But that's usually how I meet Threadheads. I'm just like, "Hi, I sort of know you." I feel like I know you. So I appreciate that you didn't treat me like I was that crazy. And also, just a tip for anybody who's listening who isn't super familiar with Swag's powers when it comes to planning and savings and stuff. He saved me $243 last week. I swear, by bringing Southwest Airlines discount to my attention. So thank you, Swag. I owe you beer or several.
My second favorite type of comment I get on the website is the people who tell me that I've saved them money. And then my absolute favorite is once in a while I'll have someone who tells me that, because of one of my deals, I'm able to come to Jazz Fest. I didn't think I was going to be able to afford it. And with this, I can. So that's the absolute best.
That rules. That's awesome. Yeah. All right. So what are your top tips? For somebody who's never been to Jazz Fest before, what are 3 top tips, insider knowledge from the Swag?
So the first tip is make sure you spend some time wandering. There may be a particular band you're coming to see, and absolutely that's great. Go see them. But there's so much music of so many different varieties across so many different stages. You can go ahead and plan out your whole day, but make sure you leave some time just to kind of wander around and follow your ears and discover something new. And the second tip is kind of a corollary of that, which is don't be afraid to change your plans. If you thought you had someone circled on the grids and you went to go see them, and their set was just kind of so-so, and that happens sometimes. There's 8 other bands playing, so don't get stuck in one spot. If something isn't bringing you joy, then move on and find something that does. And I guess tip number 3 is the shoes. You're going to be doing more walking than you think, so make sure you wear comfortable shoes. Don't wear new shoes that you haven't broken in. And for God's sake, if it's going to rain, don't wear flip-flops.
Very good advice. So the last question is the personal question for you. Again, Nicole and I wouldn't think of this, but so you met your girlfriend at Jazz Fest, and the deep personal question is, does she call you Swag?
Yeah, so we actually, I knew her through the Jazz Fest forum, through the chat boards, but the first time we actually met was actually at the Crawfish Fest up in New Jersey, which is a New Orleans themed festival they do up there. That was the first time we met, and we were friends for a couple of years before we started dating. She refers to me as Swag when she's talking to other people, but when she's if she has to call me across the room, usually not.
And so you and your lovely Linda relocated in the last few years, and you moved from your respective homes in Texas, right, in North Carolina,
Yep.
and then you relocated to New Orleans. And so, can you tell us a little bit about how your relocation to New Orleans has changed you?
Well, it's been a great move. I love this. I loved visiting the city, and I was pretty sure I would love living here, and I do. It's great. I've got so many friends here, and there's so much great music and so much great food. And when it comes to the festivals, it's nice not having to buy plane tickets and look for hotels for sure. And more than that, it's somewhat freed me up because I can see so many of the great local bands year round.
Mm-hmm.
That when the inevitable conflict comes up at Jazz Fest, who do I go see, right now? Do I go see, this out of town touring band who I've never seen or maybe haven't seen in a while, or I go see some a local band who I love and they're great, but I saw them last Tuesday at a club. It makes the decision a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
Swag, I think you survived the interview.
Thank God.
Live another day. Nicole, do we have anything else?
No, I mean, well, actually, we asked everybody online if they had one question, they could let us know if they had one question they could ask you, what would they ask you? And there's some really good ones. I think we might try to drag you back into the show for a quick swag update once the details are set for October, because this is a whole new ball game and we need leadership or we're going to be a hot mess at the fairgrounds. So I think we might need some swag wisdom and insight a little bit closer to October. So that's why we treated you mildly today, so that you'll come back and join us again. I don't want anyone who has volunteered and agreed to meet with us in the next couple weeks to think that they're off the hook, and we're not going to ask the tough probing questions, because we will. So please come back.
Absolutely.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you guys. I'm going to hit stop recording here.
All righty.